Before the magic, there was only silence. A silence filled not with peace, but with longing. Longing for a different life, for an escape. For a story to unfold that didn't end in quiet disappointment. Joanne Rowling, born in a modest town in Gloucestershire, England, wasn't born with a wand in her hand or a best-selling manuscript in her backpack. She was born into the kind of ordinary that often swallows dreams whole. But within that ordinary girl lived a voice that refused to stay silent. A voice that told stories, created characters, and imagined impossible things long before the world ever knew her name. From a very young age, Jo was different. While other children were content to play outside or collect stickers, she was busy building entire worlds in her mind. She devoured books, everything from fairy tales to Dickens. Words became her refuge, her rebellion, her home. By the age of 6, she had written her first story, a tale about a rabbit who gets measles. It wasn't grand, it wasn't magical, but it was hers. And in that moment, even as a child, she realized the power she held to create something from nothing. It was the first spell she ever cast, not with a wand, but with a pen. But her early years weren't filled with fairy godmothers or enchanted mentors. Her relationship with her father was strained, and her mother, whom she adored, was slowly deteriorating from multiple sclerosis. Watching someone she loved fade in both spirit and strength began to change Jo. It introduced her to sadness before she could even fully understand joy. It gave her pain she couldn't explain and questions she couldn't answer. But instead of closing up, she poured that confusion into her imagination. Her stories became more complex. Characters had sorrow, loss, and courage. She didn't know it then, but she was preparing herself to write the kind of magic the world would one day hold close. At school, Rowling wasn't the top student, nor was she the most popular. But she was observant, always watching, always thinking, always turning moments into scenes. She would scribble stories during class and daydream during exams. Her teachers noticed her creativity, but didn't always understand it. The system wasn't built for dreamers, and Jo didn't quite fit in. But even then, she didn't stop. She carried a sense of quiet defiance, the belief that there was more to life than what the world expected of her. As a teenager, she continued writing, escaping deeper into fiction as her mother's illness worsened. The home felt heavier, now thick with silence, grief, and uncertainty. Jo couldn't fix her mother's body, but she could still create, so she did. Story after story, she built a world inside herself that didn't fall apart, even when everything else around her did. She would later say that she was as close to broken as a human can be, but even then, she had a flicker inside her that refused to go out. Not yet. Rowling's years at the University of Exeter were a new beginning of sorts. She studied French and the classics, more out of practicality than passion, but her heart remained in storytelling. She read voraciously mythology, ancient history, the structure of stories that had lasted centuries. She absorbed every word, every theme, every archetype, and somewhere along the way, she started dreaming of something more permanent to book. A legacy, a way to make her stories not just an escape for herself, but a light for others. Yet life, as it does, had more trials to throw her way. After university, she worked various jobs, many of which left her drained and creatively stifled. But even in that frustration, she kept imagining. One day, while riding a delayed train from Manchester to London, something extraordinary happened. A boy with messy black hair and glasses popped into her mind. He didn't know he was a wizard. He didn't know he was famous. He didn't know his destiny. He was real. His name was Harry. And Jo, without a pen or a scrap of paper, sat on that train for 4 hours, letting the entire world of Hogwarts flood her mind. By the time she arrived in London, her life had changed forever, though she didn't know it yet. The birth of Harry Potter was not the end of her struggle. In fact, it was the beginning of the most difficult chapter of her life. Her mother died shortly after she began writing the book. she never got to read a single word. That loss cut deeply, not just as a daughter, but as a storyteller. Jo had wanted her mother to see what she had built. She had wanted her to believe in her dream. And now, she had to carry that dream forward without her. That grief would later bleed into the books, most notably through Harry's own longing for his lost parents. Art imitating life in the most heartbreaking way. Looking back, the world would later romanticize these early moments of the struggling writer, as if they were part of some grand, noble journey. But in truth, they were painful, isolating, and filled with uncertainty. Jo was not a name in light. She was a name on bills, on rejection letters, on welfare forms. But still, she wrote. She wrote in cafes with her infant daughter asleep beside her. She wrote in the spaces between despair and hope. She wrote because she had to be, because something inside her still believed in the story. Okay? And that belief was stronger than the rejection, stronger than the poverty, stronger than the fear. And that is where the magic begins, not in spells or potions, but in that impossible defiance. The refusal to give up when everything says you should. The courage to keep writing when the world isn't listening. J.K. Rowling wasn't a legend when she started. She was a woman on the edge, holding onto a story like it was the only light she had. And in many ways, it was. This is what so many people miss when they look at her success. They see the books, the films, the empire, but they don't see the girl who watched her mother die without seeing her dream. The woman who scribbled in cafes while battling depression. The mother who had nothing but a pen and a belief in a boy named Harry. Her story didn't begin at the top. It began undergrounding the trenches of heartache, loneliness, and loss. But what makes her extraordinary is not just what she created. It's when she created it. Before the world knew her name, before the first wand was waved, J.K. Rowling lived in the shadows. But it was in those shadows that she found her voice, a voice strong enough to carry a generation, a voice that would echo through time. Because the truth is, before the magic, there was pain. But from that pain came purpose, and that's where all the best stories begin. There comes a point in every great story when the hero is completely shattered, when the storm is no longer distant thunder, but a relentless downpour drowning everything they hoped for. For J.K. Rowling, that moment wasn't just a chapter. It was an entire season of life. After the spark of Harry Potter had ignited in her mind, life didn't magically align to help her tell the story. In fact, it seemed determined to bury it. What followed was not a gentle path to publishing glory, but a devastating fall into poverty, heartbreak, and emotional collapse, the kind that could silence even the most passionate dreamer. But Rowling, though shaken, would not be silenced. Fresh from university, Rowling took on a job as a researcher and bilingual secretary for Amnesty International, where she translated testimonies of those suffering under oppressive regimes. It was powerful, often harrowing work, and while it inspired her, it didn't bring her closer to her dream of becoming a writer. She moved to Portugal, hoping to teach English and perhaps escape the growing sorrow that followed her after her mother's death. It was there she met and married a man one she believed could bring happiness. But fairy tales don't always begin in truth, and their relationship quickly soured. The marriage was brief and tumultuous, marked by arguments and emotional unrest. It ended with Rowling fleeing the country in the dead of night, her infant daughter, Jessica, in her arms, terrified but determined to survive. Back in Scotland, she found herself a single mother, unemployed, and relying on welfare to survive. The shame that came with poverty was relentless. She was no longer a student with potential or a wife with a future. She was a statistic, just another single mom struggling to make ends meet in a system that too often looked the other way. The stigma clung to her like a second skin. She was judged at every turn, dismissed, overlooked. Her mental health deteriorated rapidly. Depression, Not just the sadness we speak of casually, but clinical, paralyzing depression began to consume her. She later described it as the cold absence of feeling, that hollowed out feeling that threatens to erase even your will to live. In her darkest moments, Rowling contemplated ending her life. The thought wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, creeping, and terribly convincing. But what pulled her back from that edge was the face of her daughter. Jessica became her anchor, her lifeline. Even when Rowling had nothing, she had love. And in those desperate hours, she began to write again, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. Harry Potter was no longer just a story idea. It was her last lifeline. Writing was how she breathed when life felt suffocating. She would take her baby on long walks until Jessica fell asleep in her stroller, then rush into a cafe and pour her soul into the pages. The manuscript was written on scraps, in longhand, at kitchen tables, and cheap, fueled by endless cups of coffee and an even more endless sense of hope. She was writing about magic while living through misery. But that is what made her story powerful. Rowling didn't write from comfort. She wrote from the raw, unfiltered trenches of pain. And somehow, her sorrow gave birth to something luminous. Yet, even after finishing the manuscript, the world didn't roll out a red carpet. Quite the opposite. She submitted her work to over a dozen publishers, most of whom rejected her outright. One even advised her to get a day job because children's books don't make money. It was cruel, dismissive, and deeply wounding. This letter that came back with a no felt like another nail in the coffin of her dream. But still, she didn't stop. Because when you've already hit rock bottom, rejection becomes less frightening. She had faced the darkest corners of herself and survived. No publisher's opinion could scare her more than her own despair once had. Eventually, a small publishing house called Bloomsbury took a chance. But even then, the initial print run of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was tiny, only 500 copies, many of which were sent to libraries. There was no celebration, no instant fame, no fireworks. But Jo Rowling held that first printed book in her hands, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not just as a mother, or a welfare recipient, or a woman trying to rebuild, but as a writer, as the person she had always believed she could be. Behind the scenes, she still struggled. Fame didn't immediately fix the wounds she had carried. It didn't erase the nights of hunger or the years of heartbreak, but it gave her a platform, a voice. And slowly, the world began to listen. Children devoured the book. Parents found themselves reading alongside them. A story that had been born in the shadows began to shine. It's what makes Rowling's descent into rock bottom so powerful, isn't just that she survived it. It's that she created from it. Most people try to forget their worst moments. She mined hers for gold. Depression gave her the Dementors. Loss gave her Harry's grief. Poverty gave her empathy. And rejection gave her resilience. She wove her life into her fiction so seamlessly that millions who had never known her pain still saw themselves in her story. That is the mark of true artistry, not just to entertain, but to heal. Rowling's story during this time is not just about tragedies, about transformation. It's about a woman who refused to let the world define her, who refused to stay broken, who fought to give her daughter a better life, and in doing so, gave the world one of the greatest stories ever told. She did not wait for life to be perfect before creating. She created in spite of life being broken, and that courage, quiet, gritty, unseen's what changed everything. Because here's the truth, most success stories skip. You can be brilliant and still be broke. You can be talented and still be torn apart. You can have everything inside you and still have nothing around you. But if you keep going, if you write that next word, take that next step, sing that next note, something incredible might begin to unfold. Not because the world suddenly decides you're worthy, but because you finally decided you are. Rowling's journey through heartbreak and rock bottom wasn't just a detour on her path to success. It was the path. Every tear she cried, every night she went without, every no she received, each one etched deeper into the soul of the story she was meant to tell. And perhaps that's why her books don't just entertain, they resonate. Because they come from a place we all know. It's the place of almost giving up and choosing not to. For J.K. Rowling, success did not arrive like a thunderclap. It didn't sweep her off her feet or erase her past like some grand miracle. It crept in, softly and slowly, almost shy, like a character tiptoeing into a new chapter. After years of struggle, after rejection letters and solitary nights hunched over a notebook in a cafe, she held in her hands a modest first edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It was published by a small house Bloomsbury because of one man's daughter, an 8-year-old girl who devoured the first chapter and begged for more. That girl's excitement became the turning point. One voice of belief after countless no's, one spark in the darkness. Even then, Rowling couldn't have known what was coming. That those 500 copies would soon become 5,000, then 500,000, then more. That her story of a lonely boy under the stairs would transcend genres, borders, generations. That what she'd written through heartbreak and hunger would one day heal millions. The first book began to gain traction. Children weren't just reading it, they were obsessed. Parents waited in line to get it for their kids. Teachers read it aloud in class. For the first time in her life, Rowling saw something extraordinary. Her pain was turning into purpose. Story was becoming ours. As the books gained popularity, publishers across the globe took notice. Scholastic won the U.S. rights in an auction for a then unprecedented $105,000, an amount that left Rowling in tears. Not because she was greedy or had dreams of riches, but because, for the first time in years, she could breathe. That number meant food on the table, It meant clothes for her daughter. It meant she wouldn't be evicted again. It meant survival. But even more than the financial lifeline, what lifted her was the sense of validation. She had risked everything, her comfort, her pride, her time, her sanity, to follow this fragile dream. And now, the world was whispering back, "We believe in you." With the release of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and then The Prisoner of Azkaban, the fandom grew rapidly. Readers were lining up at midnight for her books. Midnight for a book. That's not just success, that's cultural impact. Rowling wasn't just writing stories anymore. She was shaping childhoods, forging lifelong readers, creating a movement. She didn't set out to be famous, She simply wanted to tell the truth through fiction. But in doing so, she became a voice for everyone who had ever felt invisible. Then came the films. Warner Brothers acquired the rights, and the magic leaped from page to screen. Suddenly, Harry had a face. Hogwarts had walls. The world Rowling built in the corners of was now alive on screens across the planet. And she was deeply involved, not just signing away rights, but guiding the vision. She ensured the heart of the story remained intact. This wasn't just business for her, it was sacred. These characters had lived with her through her darkest days. They'd saved her. She owed them everything. And the world couldn't get enough. The books became bestsellers again and again. The movies became global phenomena. Rowling was no longer just a writer. She was an empire. But more than that, she had become a beacon to single mothers, to aspiring writers, to anyone who had ever faced the edge and somehow stepped back. She wasn't a billionaire in a castle with a silver spoon in hand. She was one of us, proof that you could begin with nothing and still create something eternal. Still, with great success came great scrutiny. Rowling was thrust into a spotlight she never expected, with headlines dissecting her personal life, her parenting, her opinions. Fame, as it often does, came with a cost. But she stood tall, wielding her voice with precision and compassion. She didn't allow herself to be defined by her trauma, nor by her titles. She used her platform to speak about mental health, about poverty, about perseverance. She gave back, donating millions to charities, supporting single parents, medical research, and literacy. She never forgot who she had been in. Perhaps that's why she remained grounded, even while flying higher than most. As the final book approached, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Rowling felt the weight of saying goodbye, not just to a character, but to the chapter of life that had held so much of her soul. Writing that last sentence was a moment of both grief and gratitude. It was closure, not just for Harry, but for herself. The girl who wrote in with tear-streaked cheeks had now given the world a gift it would never forget. And yet, even as that chapter ended, Rowling didn't fade. She reinvented. She wrote adult fiction, plays, screenplays. Some were met with acclaim, others with criticism. But the difference now? She wasn't writing to prove her worth. She was writing because she was free to create without fear. She had already weathered the worst storms. She had nothing to prove and everything to share. But let us be clear, Rowling's comeback wasn't a single moment. It was the sum of 1,000 tiny acts of bravery. Every day she chose to write instead of surrender. Every time she faced a blank page and believed, despite the odds, that her words mattered. Her magic wasn't in the spells or the castles, it was in her persistence, in the grit that said, I will keep going, even when no one believed, even when no one saw. And that is the real spell she cast on the world, not just turning a story into a phenomenon, but turning heartbreak into healing. She took everything the world tried to break in her and turned it into art. She proved that brokenness isn't the end, that you can begin again, that the darkest moments can become the foundation of the brightest legacies. J.K. Rowling didn't just make a comeback, she rewrote the definition. Story wasn't a straight line. It was twisted, painful, messy, and absolutely magnificent. And for every person watching, for every soul hanging on by a thread, wondering if they have what it takes to rise again, her life whispers something powerful. You do? In a world obsessed with quick wins and picture-perfect success stories, J.K. Rowling's journey is a necessary reminder that greatness is often forged in silence, in darkness, and under the crushing weight of self-doubt. Her life wasn't scripted by fairy dust. It was written in survival ink, through nights of uncertainty, through cold rooms and colder stares, through tears that dried into paragraphs and sentences that built worlds. But from her story, there emerges not just admiration, but a lesson, one that speaks not to the already successful, but to the struggling, the tired, the broken, and the dreamers who've almost given up. At the heart of Rowling's journey is this: pain can be power. Her trauma didn't prevent her from creating, it fueled her. She didn't wait until she was healed to start writing. She wrote while healing, through healing, sometimes instead of healing. In a society that often tells us to get over it or wait until things settle, she teaches us that creation is not reserved for the calm. Art is born from chaos, and beauty often grows in broken places. Her books resonate so deeply, not because they came from comfort, but because they came from her truth. And that truth about loss, love, fear, and courage falls in every person who's ever felt unseen. Another profound lesson is that rejection is not a death sentence, it's a redirection. Rowling was told no by countless publishers. The very manuscript that would one day be treasured by millions was once passed over without a second glance. Imagine if she had stopped there. Imagine if one more no had silenced her, but she didn't. And that's the power of persistence. It's not glamorous, it's not fun, it's exhausting and often thankless. A pit, it is everything. The gap between those who succeed and those who don't is rarely talented's tenacity. Rowling believed in her story, even when no one else did. And sometimes that belief has to be enough, at least for a while. Then there's the lesson of authenticity. Rowling didn't write what she thought the market wanted. She didn't chase trends. She didn't write to fit in. She wrote the story she needed to tell. A story filled with orphans and friendships, with the ache of missing parents and the hope of chosen families. She wrote from the rawness of her life, and because of that, her readers felt seen. In trying to heal herself, she ended up healing others. That is the power of being real. In a digital age where filters dominate and curated lives fill our screens, Rowling's success is a tribute to being authentic, to telling your truth, to trusting that your voice, however cracked or small, matters. Rowling's journey also teaches us about reinvention. She could have stopped after Harry Potter. She could have retired into luxury and silence, but she kept writing, even when the world was watching with a more critical eye. She embraced new genres, new stories, and yes, new mistakes, but she kept evolving. That's another powerful lesson. Success isn't a final destination. It's a continual process of becoming. You're never done, okay? Even when you've made it. There's more to learn, more to give, more to create. Rowling reminds us that we are not limited by our past victories or our past failures. We can begin again and again and again. Also, let us not overlook her role as a mother. Rowling didn't chase her dreams in spite of being a mother. She chased them because of it. Her daughter was her reason, not her excuse. In a world that often tells women to choose motherhood or ambition, family or passion, Rowling defied the binary, okay? She proved that the two can coexist, okay? That dreams don't have to be delayed or destroyed by diapers and daycare. That a woman can write a legacy while raising a child, okay? And that doing so might just make the dream even more meaningful. Moreover, Rowling teaches us the importance of empathy. Her own experience with poverty, mental illness, and single parenthood shaped not only her storytelling, but her activism. She didn't hoard her success. She used it to lift others. Her charity work, her donations, her foundational stem from a heart that remembers what it means to go without. She didn't forget her journey, for that is what makes her victory so human. She reminds us that true success isn't measured by wealth or famit, ease measured by impact, by how you make others feel, by how you use your platform, by whether your success creates space for others to succeed, too. Lastly, Rowling's story is a testament to the magic of words. When the world turned its back, she turned to a pen. When she had nothing else, she had language. And through that language, she built bridges between herself and her readers, between reality and imagination, between despair and hope. Her life reminds us that stories matter. The act of telling a story, however painful or imperfect, can be an act of survival. And for someone else, it might be the light they've been waiting for. So, if you're watching this now, wondering if your dream is too late, if your past is too broken, if your life is too messy, hear this. You are not too late. Your story is not over. Rowling didn't rise because she was lucky. She rose because she kept going. Through grief, through loneliness, through self-doubt. She kept showing up for her dream. And eventually, the world showed up for her. If J.K. Rowling's story moved you, if it reminded you that even the darkest storms can birth the brightest stars, then don't let this just be another video you scroll past. Let it be a spark. Behind every great success, there's a story of pain, persistence, and belief when no one else believed. Maybe you're in your own storm right now. Maybe you're holding your own manuscript of a dream, feeling like no one will ever read it. But here's what Rowling would want you to know. You're not alone, and your story matters. If this video inspired you, click the like button, not for us, but as a silent promise to yourself that you'll keep going, just like she did. Share this story with someone you care about, someone who might need this reminder today. It could be the turning point they didn't know they were waiting for. And if you believe in stories that uplift, empower, and remind us all of our inner magic. Subscribe to our channel. We're building a community of dreamers, fighters, and storytellers just like you. Because your story could be the next one we tell. Hit that subscribe button. Let's turn pain into power together.